Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. Week 4 of testimony in the trial of doomsday cult mom Lori Vallow Daybell is still underway in Boise, Idaho. We know that she's charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and grand theft over the deaths of her daughter, Tylee Ryan, her son, J.J. Vallow, and her husband's first wife, Tammy Daybell. Now, let's talk about what happened on Tuesday, because jurors heard a recording of a doomsday podcast that featured Lori Vallow Daybell and some of her friends. Who better to talk about this than our very own Gigi McKelvey, who is live right now outside of the Ada County Courthouse in Boise, Idaho. Gigi, good morning to you. Good to see you. We got to start with this podcast. Let's just talk about some of the big takeaways. What did we learn from this?
Well, I thought it was interesting that they brought it in, Jesse, because they're not using mental health as a defense. So I was wondering, is this a way to show the jury the extreme beliefs that Lori had? But essentially, that podcast consisted of Melanie Gibb, who was in that inner core group with Lori and Chad. Then we had somebody named Thor, and then Jason Mao, who is an ex-police officer turned motivational speaker, where they were all telling about the struggles that they faced before religion changed their lives, essentially. And so we heard from each of them for a brief period of time about their struggles, and then Lori, in her part, recounted how she heard a voice tell her to go to the celestial room in the temple, and that somebody would be there with a message from Moroni or something to that effect, and then that's where she met Jason Mao. And so they only let 40 minutes of an almost 2-hour podcast into evidence, though, because here's the thing. In this podcast, she talks about her fourth husband, Joe Ryan, who was Tylee's biological father. That stuff was not allowed under the 404B rule, which is prior bad acts. But there was an argument about, could this open the door to Joe Ryan testimony, which would just be another big undertaking in this trial.
Our understanding is he died from natural causes, but obviously people look at this case and suspect there's something more nefarious and sinister going on with Joseph Ryan. I do want to ask you, do we know when that podcast was recorded? Was it after she had met Chad? Was it before she met Chad? And also, I'm going to ask you, what was the jury's reaction to hearing this?
Well, the jury, at this point, I don't think anything really shocks them, Jesse. They sat there stoic. There were times they looked at Lori. Now, I will tell you, at one point during the podcast, she was wiping her eyes. She had tears in her eyes. I don't know if she kind of got rejuvenated, hearing the old group back together again or what. But interesting that, that was one of the times you see her shed tears, not when pictures of her kids' bodies are up on that screen.
Yeah, look, trying to get into her mind is a little interesting. Didn't she say, so again, when do you think this podcast was recorded? Do we know?
I'm having a hard time hearing you, Jesse.
I'm sorry, Gigi. Let me see if I can make it a little bit louder. If you can hear me, I'll speak even louder. My question to you is, for the podcast, one, do we know when it was recorded? And two, Lori Vallow Daybell, didn't she say something about being a savior for women or trying to free women?
Yeah, so this podcast was recorded in November of 2018, so just either right before or right after she met Chad Daybell. She did say that she was there to essentially train women to be warriors and to fight the fight. The war starting in the next 2 years was one of the things that she mentioned. I believe they're talking about the end of the world. Remember, back in July 2020, they thought the world was just going to end. So I believe that's what she was referring to. So the jury just digesting all this. There were a few peculiar looks for sure, but definitely not a whole lot heard due to the fact that some of the other things on that podcast would have opened up a bunch of other doors in this case.
All right, so Gigi, let's talk about the friends of the Daybells, the former friends of the Daybells who testified. I thought that was incredible testimony. First, let's talk about what did we know about what happened after Tammy's death. What was Chad's behavior? What were his statements?
his demeanor, according to these neighbors and friends, was that he just wasn't acting like a grieving spouse to them. It was kind of business as usual. The kids were stunned. They just couldn't talk. And on the other hand, Chad was just acting like it wasn't a big deal. Also, one of the things that seemed very odd was the rushing of the burial. And he asked them not to call the bishop for at least an hour. He said just give him an hour, which I thought was odd. Because, you know, you would maybe want your leader of your ward there to comfort you in a time like this, but not Chad Daybell.
And didn't he also say that he was very happy right after Tammy died, that he had just met Lori?
Right. So a week after the burial, he shows up to their house with Lori Vallow and says he's met somebody he's going to marry. And this is the love of his life. They were acting like teenagers on the couch. He had his arm around her, had his hand on her leg, which is something they said they never saw him do with Tammy. And one comment that he made was that Lori had recently lost a daughter, and Lori didn't dispute that. So fast forward to after Lori has been arrested and extradited back to Idaho. He asked not only can they put their house up for her bond, but then when the neighbor who at this point knew about Tylee asked about Lori's daughter that died, Chad denied saying that Lori had lost a daughter.
So eerie considering what we know ultimately happens. Now, my understanding is we also learned about what Chad's feelings were to Lori's children, or how he perceived Lori's children viewed him. What did we learn about the relationship between Chad and Tylee and or JJ?
Well, he did mention about Tylee that she didn't like people and she didn't like him. Now, the one thing that the witness noted was that he talked about Tylee in the past tense, and that bothered her greatly because at this point she knew the kids were missing and she knew Tylee was one of Lori's children that was missing. So that really, really bothered her, using in the past tense. And it's just amazing to think how he just freely, the thing that blows my mind, Jesse, a week after Tammy Daybell's buried, he's there on their couch with Lori, and not only went to their house, went to other neighbors' houses, took Lori to the same church Tammy Daybell attended, and was introducing her to people shortly after she was buried. It just blows your mind.
I wonder if he's at all surprised that people thought that this was strange. You know, if you spoke to Chad Daybell, would he be surprised that people thought that this was bizarre that this happened? And by the way, talking about children, my understanding is we also learned about how his children were feeling after their mother died, and now he's with Lori. They felt a little bit of a disconnect with their father, no?
They did, because the witness yesterday, her name was Alice, she would go check on the children because she knew they were struggling. And at one point, Emma, who is Chad's daughter, said that she was worried because he didn't want anything to do with them. And then their son Garth chimed in and said, I don't want to lose my dad too. So I'm not sure if Chad just told them, hey, at one point Chad said he was moving into the second half of his life. Now, I don't know if that meant maybe without his kids, but it certainly was clear between Garth and Emma Daybell, two of Chad's kids, the communication with him had come to a halt or had changed dramatically in some way to the point they were worried they weren't going to have a relationship with him.
By the way, you might have mentioned this, and I apologize, but what was Lori's reaction in court yesterday to all of this? The podcast, the discussion about her husband, Chad. What was she doing?
Well, I have to say, when the witness was on the stand, when Alice's husband, Todd, was on the stand, he came on right after her. She was smiling at his testimony and kind of seemed happy to see him. During the podcast, like I said, I saw her wiping her eyes one time. She got very emotional when that was played. Of course, this is back before anything really had started. This was around the time she met Chad Daybell, so everybody was alive at this point, and just a different demeanor with her on that podcast. But her reaction was just kind of all over the map yesterday. At times she seemed a little upset, at times she seemed bored. She was giggly with her attorneys, writing in her notepad. So she was just all over the map yesterday, emotion-wise.
And are you still seeing John Pryor, Chad's lawyer, in the courtroom?
I have not. This week, I have not seen him at all. Now, that doesn't mean he's not down in the overflow room, but up in the main courthouse, I haven't seen him. However, sometimes it's hard to tell who's in that courthouse. It's packed full. We have 100 people in there. We're all sitting kind of shoulder to shoulder, but nope, no sign of him this week. And, maybe he's down there consulting with his client, because Chad actually has a hearing, I believe, tomorrow. So he may be preparing for that.
Let's talk about scheduling. What do we expect for the remainder of today? What do we expect for today and the remainder of the week?
It's hard to know with the sealed witness list, but I think the natural progression of this now is we're going to have to get into why they charged Lori with conspiracy to commit murder for Tammy Daybell. That's got to come in the form of text messages, emails, things like that. So we're kind of building up now to Chad telling the neighbors that he had a vision she wouldn't live to be 50. And this was months before Tammy Daybell died or was killed. So I think we've got to establish Lori's role in that conspiracy. Also, Melanie Pulowski, who's Lori's niece and was part of this group, has been seen here at the courthouse the last couple of days. So I'm expecting her testimony could be coming at any time, and that's one that I'm definitely looking forward to hearing. I think she has a lot of answers that we're looking for.
Oh, I'm sure it'll be interesting to hear, and maybe they are saving her for one of the last witnesses of the case. Gigi, thank you so much. I appreciate. Sorry for the audio issues. I think everybody should know that Gigi is right next to a highway, so it's really, really loud. We learned that last week from Kathy when she was out there. So thank you, Gigi. I know you have to head into the courtroom. Great reporting as always.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right, so of course Gigi will give us a live update again later on in the day. After the lunch break, we'll see what's happening in court. I'm going to be signing off for now, but here's the good news. Don't go anywhere, because we're going to head to the El Paso County, Colorado courtroom for the stepmom murder trial of Letitia Stout. If you haven't been following that one, you really should. We'll be right back.